Welcome to the top global ranked and award-nominated Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on conversations about grad school and growth. In this podcast, you'll learn about all things higher education, personal development, and sustainable productivity. This is Dr. Yvette Martinez-Vu, and I will be serving as your Femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to successfully navigate grad school and beyond. For over 14 years, I've been empowering first-gen students of color along their personal and professional journeys, and I'm really excited to support you too. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Yvette. Today, we're going to be talking about the pillars of psychological safety. This is a topic that has come up a lot, very, very relevant for my BIPOC audience. I'm really excited because today I have a special guest. Her name is Donna James, and she's a feedback and visibility coach and impact strategist. She's also a co-executive administrator and member of the community-centric fundraising CCF Global Council. Donna's work as a speaker, coach, and strategist focuses on creating more impactful engagement strategies and a foundation for healthy feedback culture. Welcome to the podcast, Donna.
Thank you. I'm so excited. And I am just really excited about all of the crossover of our passion in this conversation.
Me too. And then just for the audience, you all don't know, but this is our second time trying to record this.
Because we
ran
persist.
into Yes, we persist. Yeah, tech sometimes doesn't work in our favor, but it looks like it will work today. And well, before we get into folks hearing more about who you are, what you do, I'm excited for them to get to know you. They're going to love you just as much as I love you. I want to start with a quick visual description. So I'll start by saying that I'm wearing a red shirt. It's a t-shirt with some embroidered flowers, and I'm wearing some matching yellow beaded earrings that are shaped in a flower. I'm sitting on technically it's a white chair, but it has a purple throw on it, so it looks like a purple chair. And then I've got a mic to my bottom left, and I always forget if it shows up on the bottom left or right-hand side when I actually release any video images or takes from the episode. So that's my visual description. What about you?
Yeah, I'm Donna James, a mixed race Black woman sitting in front of this is a very solidly Black chair and my blue wall, which I love.
I love your blue wall.
I love my blue wall. She makes me happy. My whole room looks like this. I have dark hair, a banging cat eye going on. And what did we decide? We decided this is like a silk caftan wrap over a black tank top. Multicolored, lots of joy.
Lots of joy. Yes. I love that description.
Color is joy. Color is joy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I know. Especially, that's what I tell people sometimes. I wear certain colors just to cheer me up. So let's tell folks who you are. I want you to tell us a little bit more about you, about your backstory, about how you got to where you are today. Whatever you're comfortable sharing about your backstory.
Yeah, I got into nonprofit really early in my professional career, but I started my life as a creative. I was trained to be a singer and just really work an audience. And so my biggest lesson at first was how much so many of our skills translate. And I think that has a lot to do with why you and I connect and how you and I connect. And like, my passion has always been the interconnectivity that makes our magic moments. And I don't find a shortage of those in nonprofit either. And I think that sometimes can feel a little bit weird, but I think for some of us, that connectivity, that juice, that joy, that's like what keeps us going. And I have gravitated towards, pieces of professional careers that can help me focus on that. So I focus a lot on engagement strategy, on how to work with people-powered projects. I got very into data very early in my career, and that has a lot to do with this connecting the dots energy. And it really led me to feedback, which ironically, I think is maybe where I started. For every art school alum or possibly student right now, we know that feeling all too well of like, I'm going to stand here, I'm going to show you everything I have, and then you're going to give me feedback. And that process to me feels really natural, but we talked about the fact that that is like breathing for me. That's everything that I've been doing forever. But really understanding how feedback works in other spaces when it's not into a microphone, when it's not in a spotlight, when it's not on stage, I think has become a real passion for me when it comes to our professional careers and our workforce, and especially nonprofit, because so much of what we do is about listening. And feedback is so much about feeling safe to speak, but also feeling safe to receive. And those two pieces are really deep in and of themselves.
You shared a couple of things there. Like one of the things that you said is that you started in nonprofit work pretty early on, but before that, you were in performance, you were singing. And I'm curious about that transition because I think that there are a lot of us, myself included, who started out doing some sort of performance and thinking we could make a living out of it. And then at some point, we might get discouraged or something comes up and forces us to pivot. And so I'm curious because I pivoted into academia, which of course I'm now like academic adjacent. But in your case, you've been involved in different types of jobs, but I'm curious how you landed in nonprofit work and how you started to have a way to articulate feedback. Like we're all accustomed to dealing with feedback for better or for worse, but you are someone who has a very particular language and discourse around it that not everybody has. And I feel like it's empowering to some extent to be able to put into words this experience of what does it mean to get feedback? What does this have to do with psychological safety? And how can talking about these two things help us to craft better environments, better spaces, safer, braver spaces?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm nothing if not like a junkie for connectivity, right? Like that is, I might need an intervention. I'm open to it. You know how I roll, right? Like,
Yeah, I do.
I really want your feedback. But I'll answer the pivot first, because I think for me, it didn't feel too much like a pivot. And I have to really shout out my alma mater for that, Berkeley. I went to a school that is made to help folks find their way in the creative workforce, in the music workforce. And I think that experience showed me really clearly how I would need to really think about what my next steps were going to be. I'm a very typical alum of the college. I had a lot of student loans. So I went through the whole educational experience kind of knowing that I would need to figure out something so that I could start dealing with that right away. And a lot of what I experienced that gave me insight into the professional workforce of creative spaces helped to show me what I was interested in and what I wasn't. And so I left school kind of knowing that I would do two things, but not really knowing what that looked like. And I landed in nonprofit the way I land everywhere. I'm very easily motivated. If you have a mission, I'm on your team. whatever it is, just a nice light breeze, and you set my sail. I'm ready. My first boss really recognized that in me, and I am so grateful for her just saying it out loud, because now I can watch it. And you know how easy it is to get me involved and into something, because I just want us to win. I want us to win. And I think that is a lot of why I've been drawn to feedback and figuring out how we can say words to each other better, because I want us to win. And it is so obvious, no matter where you sit and what industry, that the ability to sort of receive and grow, the way we grow and the way we teach is often quite disruptive. There's got to be a smoother way to offer folks feedback. There's got to be a smoother way for folks to receive it. And I got really passionate about that really young. And so much of it has to do with us as human beings. And sometimes that's an interesting sort of intersection to sit at with professional careers when we're talking about our people parts in professional spaces. It is a crossover in and of itself.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you said a couple of things, but one of the things that stands out to me is that you like to bring people together, and you are also very much interested in the potential that feedback can have for, strengthening these shared spaces and for bringing people together. But, we're here not just to talk about feedback, we're here to talk about psychological safety. And
Yeah.
even if you have an entity that has a shared mission and you're like, I'm in, sometimes it's one thing to have a mission and it's another thing to actually follow through or
Yeah.
actually uphold that mission. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, just for us to get started talking a little bit more about psychological safety, if
Yeah.
you can tell us what that means to you and also why it's so crucial especially in professional spaces, although I would, I know we would both agree it's essential everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. The phrase psychological safety is everywhere lately. And I don't know if it's because I am who I am and drawn to what I am, but it really it jumps out at me so much because it feels like a promise we can't make. And that's something that sits with me really heavily, especially in the work that I do with gathering and events. I cannot promise you a psychologically safe space. I don't even know what's going on in your head, right? Like my
Mm.
own mind is not psychologically safe sometimes. And I think so much about the depth of these words and what it means to really trust. And so I think about psychological safety as like an aspirational goal that we try for. And there are elements that we need to even be set up for success. And I don't know that we reverse engineer that too often. We're always going, we're always moving on to the next project. There's not a lot of time for like reflection and care in our work.
Mm.
But I do feel like that practice, a feedback practice, can really enable that workflow, enable that success to just sort of unfold in a less disruptive way. I had a boss that would talk about bubble ups, right? Because
Mhm.
it's always heavy, like conflict or hiccups or this or that. But like bubble ups, things happen and you have to like move through conversation. But in order to be in a place where you feel psychologically safe to like offer your creativity, you need some things already. You need a shared language, you need
Mhm.
shared culture, and you need a feedback loop, if you ask me.
Mhm. Yeah, so I want to get into that. So before you talk about feedback loops, because
Mm.
I'm super curious, I want you to expand more on what you mean by that. But you mentioned that you need to establish a certain set of things. Let's call them the pillars of psychological safety. That even though it's a potential and maybe it's something we're always working towards, and maybe it might be impossible to truly reach psychological safety. What are some of the key pillars that we should be aware of and work toward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much those umbrella buckets of what does it mean to have a shared culture? And that can be a wholly unsatisfying answer. And I am here for that feedback because it is. It means that there's more work, right? To say we are working on our culture is we're working on probably 6 to 7 to 8 things that we need to focus on that builds this connectivity. And culture is not something that you can just like lay in front of people and be like, this is your culture now, despite things that have happened in our histories. That is not how that works. We sort of are born into a culture and then we grow into different culture, and it takes time. And I think that that's the hardest part for our normal workforce, right? Is the time that it takes to build a shared culture and to have shared language around things like our human experience, right? Some workforces, it's very normal to speak about, your emotions or emotional intelligence or to use that kind of language. And in others, it's completely foreign. And if,
Mhm.
we're trying to give you feedback with language that does not resonate and does not like click into something that you understand, then it's not very helpful. And we're not doing feedback. We're just saying things. It's not the same. There has to be that connective energy in order for there to be any kind of understanding, never mind to like welcome you to respond. And that for me is like the biggest piece is that like, do we have that back and forth? Have we cultivated at
Mhm.
least some level of trust so that we can work towards some kind of psychological safety that we do need if we want our innovation and our creativity to come out as teams?
Yeah, so I heard you kind of talk about establishing a shared culture, having clarity around that, and then also having opportunities for feedback or establishing what you're calling feedback loops. Can you say more about what you mean
Yeah.
by feedback loops?
Yeah, we do a lot. I'll speak from like a nonprofit space, but I feel like a lot of spaces, especially now, are incredibly focused on feedback. Right? We survey all the time. We love we love surveys. We love data. We love it. But we focus a lot on the collecting and not a lot on what comes after that. And so a feedback loop is really a framework to really describe a full circle process of I'm thinking about asking questions. I'm going to ask them. How are you going to ask them? How are you going to deliver those questions? And then folks giving you their feedback and then bringing it back to them. A dialogue of like, this is what I heard. This is what I'll do based on that feedback, right? This is what I heard and this is what we're doing. And then having a space around course correction. If you don't have all of those steps, you're not really doing a feedback practice. You're asking for feedback, which can be helpful, but for folks to feel engaged, for that shared culture, for that shared language, for that shared understanding, folks need to be at the table as well. And for me, that's where it marries to our engagement.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me, since I know a lot of my listeners are still students, they might be college students, grad students, or they might be affiliated with higher ed in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, higher ed loves to ask for feedback. We love it.
You know what? I remember getting a lot of feedback as a graduate student from my advisor committee members, from folks I was teaching, but it wasn't reciprocal. Like, I didn't have opportunities to provide feedback to my supervisors or to my advisors. And that was always a frustration because I was like, why am I having to constantly improve my performance and no one's checking up on the higher ups?
Yeah.
So that's something that comes to mind right
feedback.
now. Yeah, is the importance of feedback all around.
Yeah,
and having feedback loops across, the board, not just the folks at the bottom.
Yeah, it has to have that return energy or it just piles up. It just piles up. And especially for like students and especially for new folks to the workforce, right? You can receive a lot of feedback, but we need to have some sort of sharing of that and like, how does that actually work in my body and how can I rise to this and how am I doing for us to feel like we're going anywhere with that. But we do a lot of trickle down feedback and then it just kind of sits there and it's very heavy on folks' shoulders. And that's, I think, a big reason why I got really passionate about it. I'm such a lucky millennial. I have had so many wonderful supervisors over my career and supervisors who have felt like managing and investing in me is a part of what that responsibility was for them. And I don't know that that's the case for everybody. So I'm really grateful for that every day. I still talk to most of those people. That's how you catch you a mentor. That's how you do it. They're amazing people out there. And I think a lot of the folks that I feel that way about, they have a feedback practice, whether or not they've like sat down and, pulled out the framework and assigned the language to it or anything like that. There's this innate, I want you to see me and I want you to know that I see you. And that practice, however you work it out, is that feedback loop. That's how you build trust.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to my example, I feel like my example was the opposite of that. There was no trust building. In fact, I didn't feel psychologically safe. And part of it had to do with that missing piece of feeling safe enough to, well, first of all, having the opportunity to provide other
Right,
folks
are they
with
open
feedback.
to it, right? Is this
Yeah, even
part of
just
it?
being open to it. And the second, being open to it and actually them taking it seriously and doing something about it. So that, to me, that's not a successful example of what we're talking about. So I'm curious, do you have any successful examples of, folks using either pillars of psychological safety or specifically successful feedback loops to help to foster a sense of or work towards a sense of psychological safety?
Yeah, I think you, very typically, Dr. Yvette, pulled out the piece that I think I see a lot, which is that like the return, right? That trickle down hierarchical feedback seems to be more of the norm. But even in your example, right, is it the professor's job as well to grow, right? Like I think partially why these things break down is we don't really sit down and set expectations all the time. But I do think that we as a mainstream audience in spaces together very much feel the need for this. Something that's popped out and been around for a long time. They're not everywhere. I hear it's a lot about cost, but like 360 reviews were trending for a while in workforces. Just the idea that managers get feedback is something quite revolutionary in a lot of spaces. I think about, it's so funny to try and think about successful models because a lot of the time folks don't even know they're doing it. And that's been the most wild thing for me as I've gotten more and more literate with this kinds of language is how much a lot of this is intuitive because in a lot of spaces it's cultural. And that I think is really challenging for our I want to find the memo and the 10 steps to success model to wrap our brains around because it is sort of an intuitive, there isn't a right way for you to do it because you have to build on what you have. You and I speak a lot in metaphors, so I'll do that here. But my kitchen looks different than your kitchen.
Yeah.
Right? We might have a goal of making dinner, but my dinner is going to look very different than your dinner. And not because your dinner is better or my dinner is better, but I had different ingredients in my kitchen. Right? But people that I'm feeding have different needs or maybe they don't like paprika. I don't know. There's things to be thought about and we should be building something for the folks that we are serving, right? Whether that's internally or externally. And in particular, when it's yourself, right? We have to have our own feedback practice with ourselves for any kind of feedback that's coming externally to have anywhere to go. You can't just accept and accept and accept every opinion that's offered. Every opinion is not feedback, right? Feedback is something very specific. It's meaningful and it's constructive. Opinions are not feedback.
Yeah. Do you feel like feedback is then a core component of working towards psychological safety?
I do. Otherwise, we have a one-directional listening thing happen. And that doesn't even really make sense. It might be my musician brain, but that does not make sense to me. That does not make sense to me. But it is something you see a lot. And I think we make choices based on what our cultures are, right? A lot of we said earlier, what's the hesitation for certain models that actually really work? 360s work, 360 reviews, making sure that there's internal feedback loops in an organization makes a big difference. A lot of spaces have tried it, but a lot of the spaces, the time, the cost, right? There are these reasons why we don't. And it's in that where I feel like we can see our culture show up, right? For me, this sense of urgency that we live in all the time is a big red flag. Big red flag. Everything that feels urgent mostly isn't for me. And having that in yourself to hold that piece is a challenging piece of work. But that sort of scarcity mindset around what we can't afford to do, I think that's where we make our real choices about how we treat our human selves, not even each other, but ourselves a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked you is because I was going to ask what are some common barriers to psychological safety in the workplace. And I feel like we've already established that not having these internal feedback loops is a major barrier. Are there any other barriers that come to mind for you in working towards psychological safety?
These may be resonant and you'll recognize them, but fear of open conflict, defensiveness. I can list 14. I very much believe that the patterns and habits of white supremacy culture are a big barrier to feedback practice. There has to be a disruption of this hierarchical idea of the right way, the right person, right? What is right? Right for who? Right for what? And I think that's kind of my biggest message is for folks to get creative with their feedback practices. Get creative because that's what's going to bring people in and that's what's going to connect. Surveys are not connecting. Surveys are dry. If it makes more sense for you to just gather people and do a dialogue and look at that later because just to be in the same room and to see you receiving it will build trust, then that's the step for right now. I think we often go to what is the big design? What is the thing I'm supposed to do? And then we work to achieve it. And I often question whether or not we should be working as hard to achieve or just work to respond. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that we process feedback, even on that macro level with our organizations or with our higher ed institutions. When we get feedback, it's like a big build to respond to it instead of maybe just respond and see what the next step is.
I feel like you already answered what I was going to ask next, which was about like, how do we contribute to building psychological safety? And you kind of said it, you got to get creative. You got to figure out what works. No two kitchens are the same.
They are not.
So first, and also some of it has to do with the culture of that environment.
Yeah.
So I guess there is no prescriptive answer here. The solution is not more surveys, which we know. We get tired of them.
So tired. People are so tired of giving feedback because of that. Like, where is this going to go?
Yeah.
Right? What is the reciprocity of this energy? I think people are very into reciprocity and we're looking for it. That is the thing. It's such a deep and vulnerable space. And I think one of the things that I'll say, because it is the most important part, is that we can only control ourselves. Right. And that's something that I think gets really tough when we work together. But that, I would say, is like the biggest thing that we can do is work on your own internal feedback process and your relationship to feedback, because that's the thing that'll get in our own way. A space can be as psychologically safe as it wants to, but if you do not feel safe, if you have something, if you're still building that courage to speak up, if you have stuff, we all have stuff we're healing from, especially from workspaces, right? If you've got some workplace trauma that stops you from, saying what you think, or you tone police yourself too hard, or, these elements of our own healing make such a big difference in the way that we show up with other people. And I do think that is the most impactful thing that we can do, is work on our own and then show up and have the courage to show up. Because often for folks who are close to me, folks who are in your audience, we are an example for a lot of people. And often we're like the tip of the spear, the first in the room. And that just capacity to do it is so impactful and exponentially impactful. And I do think for us, it's where our energy is the most useful. I think that gets really hard. We can talk all day, you and me, about the ways that we've been given what was supposed to be feedback in ways that were not safe, right? There's a ton of data on that. What do we do with it? I didn't do that. I try very hard not to show up in those ways. And I think that's what we do, right? We learn. And I think that's the hardest part, is finding it in yourself to be grateful for being able to witness ways that you would not want to show up, and to pull that lesson from it. Those are lessons too. And I'm grateful for those folks. And I hope that they're listening,
Do you have any examples, like kind of to ground us in like that work of doing work on ourselves? Because I'm thinking about, myself.
Yeah.
Not just now, but myself 10 years ago, when I would get feedback from certain individuals that was not helpful, that was to some extent snarky, and some comments that I'm like, are you trying to tear me down? Because this is not constructive. And so that made it so that I would dread feedback of any kind. Like, because every time I would get feedback, I thought there's something wrong with me. I would personalize it, as opposed to thinking take what works and what's constructive and what's going to help me be better, and then let go of the rest.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about that, and I'm wondering if someone is that still feeling that way, where every time they get feedback, it feels like a sting, or they're wanting to run away, or they just feel uncomfortable with it. Like, what are some potential strategies for them to work on themselves, or for them to work on embracing feedback a bit more?
Yeah. I'm so annoying, but I'm going to say it: practice. It's practice. Yes, I'm a musician and I think everything is about practice, but I really do think that, right? That feeling in the body is so relatable. That feeling in the body, I don't think ever completely goes away. If anybody never has that feeling, I would love to talk to you. I would love to hear how you got there. But we're vulnerable and we care and we want to be good enough. And unfortunately, because of our dominant culture, there's a lot of us walking around pretty sure that we're not enough. And we're wrong. And I want us all to know that. But that feeling of the fear, right? I feel that as like fear of what will come, fear of what it means if this is true. I think that is such a process of your internal maturity of like, do I know who I am? Right? You mentioned take what's good and like throw out the rest.
Mm-hmm.
You need a certain amount of like balance in yourself to even get to that part. And like everyone who has gotten to that part even a little bit, I hope is celebrating. I hope knows that that's a huge victory. But I do think we need to choose our own care first, right? You're talking about situations and scenarios where it seems like folks have not really been invested in their own feedback practice and work. We can't make people do their work. And in those situations, I do think our responsibility is to ourselves and to care, right? Especially now at this point in my career, I think very carefully about whether or not the feedback I have to offer will be received. I focus a lot on is the receiver on part of it more than am I gonna?
Right.
Because if the receiver isn't on, then it's not good practice for us, right? It's not a good space to practice. I would say for folks who have a difficult relationship to feedback, finding a space where you can have a good relationship to feedback, where you can work on that, is really important. I spoke about my luck with managers, my blessing with managers, and I do believe that a lot of the bad experiences we have only get rewritten in our brains when we have good ones. And I do think finding a space where if you don't have that good feedback coming to you, that affirming feedback that helps you see yourself, find that space. Find that space, find those people immediately. Do not pass go, like immediately. And you can find them. It's how you and I met. It's how I've met most of the people that I collaborate now with. Find your people, because we do have our own work to do. And that dance of how you meet other people in their work, that's the like interconnected part. That's another thing. But our own work with self and like, what are you doing? And do you feel confident when you're in the room? That is a big piece of your receiver being on. And a lot of people may have the title, have the experience, but the receiver's not on because at the end of the day, that fear spikes up. And I do think it's an exercise of working with our own self-care and our own fear, because we should know that we're good enough and that we bring things to the table. And, I don't want you to deny the world the gifts on the tip of your tongue. Say it all. But we do need a space where we know that it's welcome.
I love that you said that, finding the spaces and finding the people with which you can learn to develop a way to embrace feedback where it doesn't feel like such a threat to your body, where it feels like, okay, I trust this person, and this person, this person is to some extent, safe. I say this because I'm thinking about when I met you and we were in a shared space. And I don't know which one of us said something first, but every time you open your mouth, I was like, she's my people.
Find your people. Yeah.
And I think it might have been vice versa. I don't know what your take was, but I just remember you saying things and being the one willing to say something, and me thinking, wow, like this is someone I can actually count on, because I know that like she's going to be willing to offer constructive feedback to make spaces better. And I love that.
Yeah.
And that's how I knew I need to stay in touch with her, which is why we're still talking today.
You were a feedback machine, right? Like instantly, that's something that I would imagine you're like that in most spaces, right? You make a concerted effort to ask for what you need. And like that shows me that you have worked hard to get to a place to do that, to know that that's needed. And it's not just about you. And I think feedback is something that we can think of the same way, right? It's not just about us, and getting to work on it is not just about us, right? We just talked about it. It's about a shared culture. It's about shared practices, because everyone needs feedback. We all need support. We all need help. We need different perspectives. We need people's ideas. We need collaboration. And if you don't feedback well, then all of those things are hard. All of those things are hard.
And I will admit, I still find it challenging. And I still sometimes have to bite my tongue, and I'm like, okay, this is for my own good.
Like a human being.
So I just want to say, but if folks still feel uncomfortable, like that's okay. It's part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Just sitting in the discomfort, getting through the discomfort is a victory, right? Getting to a place where you're like, you can take the feedback and then you go, you go yell about it with your family. Like that's healthy. You got to be you. I think that also is something that we do, is we tend to like cut out these elements of ourselves because they're not welcome in every space. But like, that's okay. You are allowed to have all of your feelings. No one is saying that you need to be the Buddha of feedback, right? Like all the things. No. Can you receive? Can you reflect? Can you pull out, like you said earlier, like the parts that are helpful, and then kind of sift out the grains that you don't want? Can you do that? When we talk about folks who don't have the receiver on, I experience it. And when I've not had my receiver on, because that, again, human beings, when that happens, like none of it even gets in. You can't get those good pieces. You're not hearing them because of the resistance. So to even allow it to get in is a step in and of itself. And it is really important.
We're all actually getting close to wrapping up. I can't believe it went by so fast. Of course it did. But I'm curious if you have any other words of advice to listeners who want to kind of embrace this, who want to invest more in feedback, work on themselves, work on improving the spaces that they're part of. And aside from that, also, if there were any questions that you were hoping that I asked you that maybe I didn't get to ask. So if any closing words of advice, or if not, if there's any other question or topic you wanted to expand on.
I mean, practice. And both for giving and receiving, like really having literacy in what our dominant culture is, right? These things that perpetrate and perpetuate white supremacy culture, this defensiveness, the fear of open conflict. Some of these are huge mental health elements, right? We all acknowledge perfectionism as we don't like her. We don't like her. We don't want to sit with her anymore. She's mean to us. She's a mean girl. And
I have the, it's funny because you were talking about the tenets or the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And I just pulled out a little.
First of all, I want that.
Handout I have.
I don't know where you got that, but I want it.
Next time I see you in person, IRL, I will get you one of these. It's laminated.
I see that, which just makes me love you more. Yeah, for me, those key pieces to look for have given me such grounding. And I will absolutely own that it has a lot to do with who I am and the parts that make me up. But for me, that is a very good foundation for a solid self-care practice, right? A lot of the mean things we say to ourselves, a lot of the bad feedback we give ourselves comes from those tenets, right? The feeling that we're not good enough, we're not moving fast enough, the not enoughness is wrapped up in those. And for me, that feels like the only piece that is like in the way of us feeling empowered enough and safe enough to even expose ourselves to feedback. So for me, that is like that's always my first step. That's my 101. That's my Donna 101. These tenets, these day-to-day characteristics, because we're all moving around hoping that we're not doing and practicing things that are not aligned with our values. But I find that though we've had these years and years and years of like DEI, and now there's backlash and all this stuff, we move the goal a lot. But the one thing that I don't see us really doing is really getting literate about what this culture is, really getting fluency in what it is so that we can see it and recognize it and have shared culture and language around, is this our sense of urgency peaking up? Is this some paternalism? Is that mine to give you advice about, right? Like they're so key and they're so human. And in a weird way, like game recognized game, right? This dominant culture is formidable for a reason. It preys on our human vulnerability. And I really hope that this era can get us all seeing that a little bit more, because we talk about our human nature in a way that makes me just sad. And I just don't believe that's our human nature. I believe these are habits, bad generational habits that it's our work. It's our work to slow down. It's our work to stop. And it's our work to practice something different. And I do think that that's the first step.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I feel like we can end it there. Yeah, mic drop.
Change the culture. Boom. But yeah.
So, okay, last question, because folks have to hear this. For folks who resonated with what you shared and who want to connect with you, who want to hear more from you, how can they reach you or how can they connect you or support
Yeah.
your work?
I mean, obviously, I'm accessible on Instagram because that's where we all live. You can find me at Practice Donna. Practice, practice, practice. I'm very into it. And I'm hoping to have some more things rolling out soon. I'm on all of the socials. I'm just going to point you to the Instagram because you can find everything else from there. You can find my website at collectiveexperience.us. I am so down to collaborate with anybody who is moving in a way of really trying to make belonging and really trying to center the people and the human elements in their projects. And I'm really happy and I feel so blessed to be living in this era where there really is a lot going on. And I really encourage folks, if you feel the darkness settling in, really go find the light because there's so many people every day, especially our host here, right? Like working to make and bring different energy into the world. So if you don't see it, go find it. And if you can't find it, reach out because we'll help.
Yeah. So we'll make sure to include your Instagram, your website on the show notes. Anything else you want to share, it'll be in the show notes. Make sure to follow Donna. Make sure to check out her website. And who knows, maybe you can work with her, as I know she's also a coach like me. So please check out her offerings. She is just like so full of a wealth of knowledge, experience, tools. I love learning from you. So
I love learning from you. We're biased. There's some mutual love here, and we just need to own it, and that's fine. But if you have not worked with Dr. Yvette as well, like y'all, just find your
we
people.
geek out together. That's the thing. I knew it would be a love fest.
With. Yeah. Find your nerds, find your weirdos, and be weird together.
Yes,
that's everything. That's everything.
Yeah, it's so funny. I don't know. Maybe it must be our Leo moons, or I don't know what it is, but yeah, just make sure, don't miss out. Follow Donna, on the socials. Stay in touch, because you're gonna get a lot from her. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for being a guest. Thank you for your generosity of sharing space. Every time I make a connection with someone that I'm like, dang, I really care for this person. I feel like this person has a lot to offer to the world and I want to amplify their voices. I try to bring them on the podcast. Not everybody accepts my invitation because I get that not everybody wants to be, publicly out there in this way. But I'm so glad you said yes to me because I want the world to know more about you. So thank you again, Donna. It's been so much fun.
Well, thank you for asking me. Thank you for having me. And just thank you for being you.
Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you like what you heard, here are 4 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you email me a screenshot, I'll send you a surprise freebie. The second way is to get your copy of my free Grad School Femtoring Resource Kit, which includes essential information to prepare for and navigate grad school. You can access it at the link in today's show notes. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @GradSchoolFemtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. The last way to show your love is to order a copy of Is Grad School for Me, my graduate school admissions book for first-gen BIPOCs. Thanks again for listening, and until next time,